Good afternoon. I am Ernesto Morales, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation, Business, Licensing, and Compliance, known as the BLC Assistance Program. BLC programming is designed to assist social equity applicants in Los Angeles in obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This installment of our 2025 webinar series focuses on cannabis health and safety standards. Now, before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping items. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed only in DCR's learning management system after the editing process. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or to comment on the information that is being provided. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on today's topic. Please ask questions. Ask questions about today's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation and will have a Q&A session where you will also get responses in the last portion of today's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. And finally, please note that today's content was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor does it constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions outside of today's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours, which are Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to speak to a DCR representative. And now, I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest presenter, Matt Hayashi. Matt is an OSHA Authorized General Industry Trainer with Cannabis Clearwater, LLC, and an instructor for OSHA Industry Training for Cannabis Professionals. He is an achievement-oriented manager with a proven 14-year record of accomplishments in the pharmaceutical industry that includes expertise in sales, U.S. international business development, logistics, purchasing, contract analysis, and investor relations. He founded Cannabis Clearwater, LLC, a full-service compliance company assisting the cannabis industry with permits, licensing, and growing a business. Now I would like to ask Matt to join me on screen. Welcome, Matt, and feel free to start sharing your screen and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto. Again, my name is Matt Hayashi, and I am an Authorized General Industry Instructor for OSHA. I want to thank the Department of Los Angeles for giving me this opportunity and talk about cannabis industry health and safety. That is my contact information for those who have any questions about this matter. Please let me know and give me a call. For the lesson overview for today, we will primarily talk about the current and new cannabis safety rules and regs with respect to OSHA and OSHA's compliance. Okay, and we will go over why is OSHA important to you from both an employer as well as an employee perspective. What rights do you have under OSHA? This falls for under the employer and employee as well. They're two separate rights. And number three, what responsibilities does your employer have under OSHA? So under the Department of Cannabis Control in Sacramento, they control and govern the guidelines for cannabis. Cal OSHA is a separate entity, and they are the stewards for the employees who get hurt. So for today's lessons, we will go over these 3 bullet points. And let me hit the next slide here. I always like to ask, why is OSHA important to you? 4,405 workers were killed in 2013. Nearly 12 workers die every day. 797 Hispanic or Latino workers were killed in 2013. And 3 million serious workplace injuries and illnesses were reported in 2012. Now, this is important to you because before OSHA, that was signed in, I believe, in 1972 by Richard Nixon, there was no steward for the employees. The numbers back then, when there were not any rules or regs for safety, there wasn't any, and there were a lot more people that got injured. So these are the current numbers since of 2013, but I could assure you that the numbers back then in the 70s and prior to OSHA, they were astronomically high. So the brief history of OSHA. December 29th, 1970, President Nixon signed the OSHA Act. Okay. Act was created by OSHA, and it came into being on April 28th, 1971. And OSHA, for those of you who don't know, OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration Agency, from the agency of U.S. Department of Labor. Okay, responsibility to improve worker safety and health. Now, the Cal OSHA is separate from OSHA, even though it falls under one guidance. For California in cannabis industry, regardless if it's any ancillary, cultivation, nursery, dispensary, lab, manufacturing, transportation, it doesn't really matter. All of the ancillaries that fall under safety is Cal OSHA. It is not federal OSHA. So there are 2 separate departments, even though there is an OSHA department. But for cannabis in the state of California, it's Cal OSHA. So, for example, if there was let's say there was a person who works at a nursery, and they got injured by a chemical spill. Okay, when OSHA comes on the premises to that nursery to do the inspection, it's going to be Cal OSHA, not Fed OSHA. It's a big distinction. OSHA, Fed OSHA, or for the lack of a better word, OSHA here, they don't have that much jurisdiction, but Cal OSHA does. Now, with respect to this, there are only 2 departments in the entire United States. There is OSHA, or Fed OSHA, and there's Cal OSHA, okay? Both of which are very important. They kind of follow the same standards, but I need you to understand that in the cannabis space, cannabis growers and cannabis workers, any type of business falls under the category of Cal OSHA. OSHA's mission, or Cal OSHA's mission, to assure safe and healthful working conditions by setting and enforcing standards, excuse me, and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance. Excuse me. Developing job safety and health standards and enforcing them through work site inspections. Providing training programs to increase knowledge about occupational safety and health. What it comes down to is identification on some of these greater risks on people getting hurt, employees getting hurt. And there are assessments that are being involved. You have to wear the appropriate PPE. You have to have the appropriate programs, health programs, and we'll get into these things. But this is OSHA's mission. Okay. Coming from an employee perspective, these are the rights that you have under OSHA or Cal OSHA. Okay. So as an employee, so if an employee worked at a dispensary, at a lab, or at a manufacturing facility, outdoor, indoor, it doesn't really matter. These are the rights that an employee has. You have the right to a safe and healthful workplace. That's normally number one. Generally speaking, employees have the right to have a safe and healthful workplace. And you have the right as an employee to ask those things to your manager. Okay. You also have the right to know about hazardous chemicals. And it should be required, to be quite honest. When employees work with chemicals, they should understand what the safety data sheets are, or what I was brought up as material safety data sheets. But nonetheless, you have to understand what these hazardous chemicals are. The reason is they could be toxic, meaning that you have a short amount of time working with these chemicals before bad things happen to your body from a systemic perspective, like if it gets into your blood, or from a local perspective, target organs type of thing. You have a right to report an injury to an employer without retaliation, by the way. So, for example, if you cut your finger using a cutter that your employer gave to you, you have a right to report your injury to your employer, and without getting fired. You shouldn't have to do that. Any injury, you must report that to your employer, or at least you should. You have the right to complain or request hazard correction from employer. So, for example, if your manager gave you instructions to use a ladder, and you notice that the ladder is broken, you have a right to complain to your manager and request to replace the ladder to get a new ladder. And the manager has an obligation to fulfill that complaint. Okay. If not, the employee does have a right, and we'll get into it. The employee has a right to contact OSHA. You have a right to be trained and retrained. Generally speaking, under general industry as well as construction and other standards in OSHA, you should have, one of the first things that you do, you should have a training manual. You should not touch any equipment. You should not do anything physical without being trained. The employer understands this, and a good employer gives the employee the proper reading material, the proper training material before they start anything. It could be as easy as using a hammer to more complex stuff using an electrical equipment, right? So the other thing is, you have the right to be retrained from that without being fired, without the fear of retaliation. So, for example, if you are using a trimmer and you forget how to use the industrial trimmer, you have the right as an employee to request to be retrained to that trimmer, and then they sign off on it. You sign off on it, because this is all about documentation, and you have the right to be retrained. When it comes to that perspective, you're talking about you are using a piece of equipment that requires electricity, 220, 120, and volts. And that gets very dangerous, right? You have the right to inspect these things, so you should be retrained. You have the right for hazard exposure and medical records. Now, what do they mean by that? They mean from a personal equipment protection perspective, a PPE, you have the right to request gloves. You have the right, depending on the type of job that you are going to be doing in the cannabis space, you have the right to request those things. So for example, if you work at a dispensary and you are closing the dispensary and you have a job on cleaning detail, and part of your duties is mopping the floors. It could be as simple as mopping the floors. And so let's say, for example, they give you bleach, and they want you to pour bleach in a bucket, and they want you to put water in it to dilute the bleach. However, they don't give you the proper ratio water to bleach, so you don't know how much bleach to put in, right? And as you know, bleach is very toxic and it can be harmful to your skin, especially if you're allergic to it. So you have the right to request for PPE, like gloves, like a mask, a ventilator. You have the right to ask for these things if they expect you to do these things. In the event that something does happen for you to go see a doctor, you do have the right to request your own medical records. You have the right to do that. So if you had to go to the hospital and they recorded things, and the medical doctor said this was a work-related injury, you as an employee have the right to request your medical records. So if you work at a cultivation or at a nursery and you happen to cut your finger off using a knife or a saw, and you have to go see a doctor later on, you do have the right to request for those medical records. Okay. You have a right to file a complaint with OSHA. It happens all the time, not in just cannabis space, but it does happen in general industry and agriculture and maritime and construction. Okay. So what do they mean by that? Well, as an employee, you are expected to do certain things that is required by your employer, right? If you are a maintenance person, they expect you to do maintenance checks on certain equipment. If you are a trimmer, they expect you to use sharps and start trimming and take proper precautions for that. But if you are being treated unfairly, if you feel like you are being used and you are being retaliated upon the job. So for example, your boss gives you a job and you see something that is unsafe. I'll use the ladder example. So let's say they want you to use a ladder, but you see the ladder is broken, but they say, I don't care, we're going to fire you if you don't get on that ladder. Well, you as an employee, your rights have been impinged on, and you do have the right to file a complaint with OSHA. And we will get into the audits and inspections. But for this slide purposes, you do have a right to file a complaint with OSHA. You do have a right to participate in an OSHA inspection. When an OSHA inspector comes on your property, it could be a lab, it could be manufacturing, it doesn't really matter. You do have the right to participate with the inspection. What does that mean? It means you have the right to follow the OSHA inspector and record the things that happen. It could be related to you, or if you are a safety manager, you do have the right to participate in that inspection. And the last one here, you have the right to be free from retaliation from exercising safety and health rights. Pretty much self-explanatory. Again, it's all about you. OSHA is a steward for the employees. They want you to succeed. And in order to do that, they want you to be safe. And if not, you do have the right to contact OSHA and file a complaint. Now, cannabis and safety and health. This is a new thing, okay? This is a new cannabis safety and health fact sheet, okay? So cannabis industry in the state of California, it falls under the guidelines of Cal OSHA, not Fed OSHA. And who runs Cal OSHA is the Department of Industrial Relations. Okay, they oversee Cal OSHA's cannabis industry health and safety, which, by the way, in the state of California, for employers with 2 or more employees, you are required to take the 30-hour training class. Okay, that hasn't changed. So for here, all employers in the cannabis industry must take steps to protect their employees from all health and safety hazards associated with their work. Kind of makes sense. Okay? These include those that cultivate, manufacture, distribute, sell, and test marijuana products. So if you run a dispensary, you have to follow the guidelines. If you have a cultivation, you have to follow these guidelines. Laboratory testing, although it is ISO 17025 and on a different standard, nonetheless, you do have to follow these guidelines because, again, we're talking about employee safety. Manufacturing and retail, the same thing, right? You still have to follow these things. Several OSHA regulations apply to workplaces in the cannabis industry. This fact sheet contains links to these regulations and other helpful resources for providing a safe and healthy workplace in the cannabis industry in the state of California. What do they mean by that? Well, one of the things is Injury and Illness Prevention Program. This is called your IIPP. Okay. IIPP is a program that is required in the state of California. Every single business owner, and I practice this all the time and I preach to it all the time, every business owner should have their own IIPP. What is IIPP? Here, they say employers in California are required to take steps to protect workers from all workplace hazards that can cause injuries and illnesses. To protect workers, employers must establish, implement, and maintain, the key word here is maintain, an effective written injury and illness prevention program. The IIPP includes many elements such as procedures to identify and correct health and safety hazards in the workplace, provide effective training to all employees so they can perform their job safely, and more. In addition, employers must communicate, another important word here, with employees in the form of readily understandable by all affected employees on matters relating to occupational safety and health, including provisions designed to encourage employers to inform the employer of hazards at the workplace without fear of reprisal. So essentially what happens is part of the OSHA training are these bullet points down below: electrical hazards, exposure to airborne contaminants, your flammables, your heat, illness prevention indoors, hazardous energy, the list goes on and on. Your IIPP includes these bullet points. This is what they call a maintenance program. In other words, stuff that you're going to use, let's say you are a manufacturer or a processor and you do, let's say for example, you do volatile processing, okay? So in cannabis space and cannabis manufacturing, there's volatile and non-volatile. But for this exercise, we're going to use volatile. So you use butane and you use other chemicals so that you can make your vape cartridges, right? You have toxic chemicals. Under this IIPP, you are going to say, we use these chemicals to make and to process in order to make the vape cartridges, right? And if you do not have these in place, OSHA does have the right to issue out a citation. You must have these. Again, from an employee's perspective, they want to work in a free environment and safe environment. From an employer's perspective, you should be able to train them properly to what you are training them to. How do you do cold pressing, right? Are you freezing your flower? What is the guideline for freezing your flower, right? So this is a very serious and very important program. And I have the templates for all of these. If you want a template, let me know. I could easily send it over to you. But nonetheless, this is required in cannabis industry safety and health. Okay? This is very, very important. There's also the non-volatile. Non-volatile is when you are processing flower and you are not using any toxic chemicals. So if you're using the cold press and you're making waxes or your gummies, your edibles, your beverages, you're going to go down that side. You still have to have an IIPP. In fact, all of these in cultivation and in distribution, laboratory, particularly laboratory as well, because you're dealing with a lot of gases. Even in retail, every single one must have an IAPP. Can't not stress this enough. Okay, this is the bulk of cannabis safety and health. When you get audited, a 100%, I guarantee this, an OSHA inspector will ask for your IIPP. If they make an unannounced inspection, they will ask for an IIPP. Generally speaking, everyone else in all other industries, including food industry, restaurant industry, automobile, they have their IIPP. It makes sense that in the cannabis space, they should have their IIPP as well. Okay, they are not trying to force you into making you think like you're bad. It's quite opposite. OSHA is for the cannabis space. They understand cannabis is not going away, so they want you to be at the level of everybody else. Okay, they want you, a cannabis employer, to be at the same standard as automobile, tech, food, restaurant industry. Okay, it just happens that they want you to do it now rather than later. And they give you about a year. You're exempt for 1 year to get all these things in place. Go to the next slide here. So I went over some of these things. All employers in the cannabis industry must take steps to protect their employees from all health and safety hazards. That includes, speaking of which, that does include like tripping hazards. So I use that for example because tripping and fall hazards is the #1 accident and for lower back injuries in general industry. It doesn't matter if you're an automobile, cannabis, restaurant, textile. Tripping and falling is the #1 cause, and it happens that it's the lower back that gets injured. Okay. Again, cannabis includes cultivation, distribution, laboratory testing, manufacturing, and retail. All of your dispensaries, and I would imagine it's going to retail / consumption lounge. Cultivation is a broad term. They're talking about nursery, as well as your outdoor, so indoor, outdoor, mixed light, whatever that you do have to follow the rules and regs for cannabis safety and health. All right. So let's get into employers in California that are required to protect workers and the IIPP. I know I went into it briefly, but we'll dive into this. Okay, so again, cannabis safety and health, IIPP, injury and illness prevention program. What is it? Well, when I do my trainings, I say this. You're going to have a binder. Your binder is going to have a cover page. Your cover page is going to be titled Injury and Illness Prevention Program. Okay. Inside your binder, what is it going to have? A lot of programs. Okay. Emergency action programs, your violent protection programs, your fire safety programs, your sharps programs. You are going to have lockout tagout procedures. You are going to have emergency access procedures. It's a big binder, and it's going to have all of these things that are used in your workspace. Now, when I say that, because in manufacturing is totally different from dispensary, right? The consumption lounges. Manufacturing, you're going to have machine equipment safety, lockout, tagout. You're going to have your PPE assessment programs. But in retail, when you go to a dispensary, it's not going to be like that, right? You're not going to have machinery. You're probably going to have more cleaning procedures. How much bleach are you going to use? How much ammonia are you going to use? Do you cross-contaminate all of your products with your cleaning agents? Are there rules and regs that happen to that? So these are the type of things that you have to understand to have a really robust injury and illness prevention program. And we review a lot of IIPs out there, and we correct and help them make sure that they maintain their proper IIPP, so that when they do get inspected from an OSHA inspector, they pass with flying colors. Okay. It is based off of Regulations Title 8, Section 3203. Cal OSHA can assist employers for developing and maintaining a written IIPP. They can help you. You can call them. Don't hesitate to call them. They are really, really good. Okay. Occupational safety has safety and regulations that may apply to employers in the cannabis industry, electrical hazards, exposures, flammables, hazard communication, lockout, tagout, heat prevention indoors, heat prevention outdoors, injury and illness prevention programs, as well as machine hazards. Okay? Again, PPE, point of operations, pressure vessels, prohibition of smoking in workplace, repetitive motion, sanitation, slip strips, workplace violence and prevention. That is a new one. The Workplace Violence and Prevention, Labor Code 6401.9. Cannabis industry is at a high risk of workplace violence incidents. Okay, violence incidents. Okay. These outlines requirements that all employers must follow to prevent such incidents. Okay. Employee involvements in developing and implementing a plan, procedures for accepting and responding to employee reports of workplace violence without retaliation, emergency response procedures, training, and as well as keeping a workplace violence incident log. Always keep a log, okay? That's very, very important. You should record everything. Moving along, employee involvement in developing and implementing the plan, like I said, inspection to identify workplace violent hazards. Part of OSHA, they are really heavy, and I agree with them, on the inspection to identify workplace violence hazards. So, for example, can someone, if they're in manufacturing and someone grabs tools that are open, they could use that as a violent weapon, and it could be assault, right? Do you put your tools away after closing day? It's probably a good idea, right? For dispensaries and your consumption lounges, I'm sure you have a lot of boxes and a lot of shipments, and then you probably have razor blades. Can that be a weapon? Can someone use that as a weapon, right? Do you keep those under lock and key after business hours? Something to consider, right? So identifying workplace violence hazards is huge. You know, it should be taken very serious, and any safety manager would agree with me when I say when you start your day, look at it from a hazard perspective. What can go wrong? What can go wrong? And just based off of that, you can already foresee what's going to happen. But to mitigate those things, you correct it right then and there, right? So this is a sheet here: workplace violence prevention. Cannabis industry is at a high risk, like I said, of violent incidents. This is the labor code. And there are tons of resources to help mitigate some of these workplace violence preventions. Okay. All right. OSHA policy and procedure checklist. This is your cannabis industry OSHA compliance policy and procedure checklist. This is a really good outline on what to do for inspections, right? Hazard inspections. And it's easy. Grab a cup of coffee, walk around, and check things off the list. I like checking boxes because it makes my day and my life easier, as well as a safety manager for a grow, right? Exit signs, ventilation. Is there enough ventilation? Yes. Occupational noise exposures. Is it higher than 65 or 75 decibels? Do they need to wear hearing protection? These are the things that you have to consider when you are running an operation. Again, lab. Do they understand how much ppm is being used from a ventilation perspective? These are the things that you have to think about. Confined workspace, right? Slip, trips, and falls. Ergonomics. How long are they trimming? How long are they going to sit there and trim on an 8-hour basis, right? They sit there for a long time, and you should, as an employer, exercise, their right to walk around and stretch their arms, right? You don't want them having an ergonomic issue and then going to the doctors and going down to workers' comp. You definitely don't want to do that. Your right to information on injury and illnesses, right? Your OSHA's record keeping rule, okay? Your 300A. In the world of OSHA, you have 3 documents that are kept: your 301, your 300A, and your 300s. And these are recording documents that you must keep in the event that there is an injury. So if someone cuts their hand and they have to go to see a doctor, you have to record it, okay? Complaints, again, going back, workers may report safety and health concerns without fear of discharge or discrimination, okay? As an employee, you do have a right. And this is not just cannabis. This is general industry. Remember, this is general industry, right? OSHA rules protect workers who raise concerns to their employer or OSHA about unsafe and unhealthful conditions in the workplace. Again, employees can contact OSHA and raise a concern, and you can be anonymous. You don't have to, spell out your name or anything like that. You can make an anonymous complaint, and they will do their inspections. Training, you have the right to be trained, like I said, and you have the right to be retrained, right? Safety and health and safety hazards, the standards, that includes chemical hazards. So every time you get introduced to a new chemical, it doesn't matter if it's a base or an acid, whatever, sodium hydroxide, whatever it is, you have the right to be trained to these new chemicals. And a good employer should practice this, because heaven forbid you hire somebody new and they were not trained to accepting chemicals from the back and they get some acid spilled on their arm. OSHA's gonna go after you because they're gonna ask, well, was that person trained? And if not, then there's citations involved. Equipment hazards, noise violations, confined spaces, okay? Oh, and in a language and a vocabulary workers can understand. So in the world of construction, when there are Hispanic workers, owners do hire translators to translate the OSHA trainings, okay? In the cannabis space, especially for cultivators during the harvest time and during the summertime when it gets hot, you must have a translator when you are translating these things, okay? Examine medical and exposure records, harmful exposures. This is how you file a complaint with OSHA. A right to file a complaint with OSHA is a violation of a safety and health standard in imminent danger and situation, okay? These are the tests. Are you in imminent danger? Does it violate a safety or health standard? That is created by the company too, by the way. It's not just OSHA, right? They have to practice what they preach. They should practice this because they are hiring employees. And employees, they want to do a good job. And in order to do that, they want to feel safe. And if they feel safe, that is a good day. They do not want to get hurt. They want to go back home. They want to see their loved ones. They want to see their spouses. They want to see their family. And in turn, they will come back and put out 100% of their workload. Okay. It turns out, interestingly enough, there's been a data point where when companies put a lot of effort into safety, the work output is almost doubled. It's almost tripled, actually, when it comes to safety. And the reason is they feel safe. So if they feel safe and they trust the system and they trust your standards, they're going to bend over backwards for a company and the output. And also, not only that, from what I've been told, the amount of money that gets saved when it comes to safety is astronomical. And we like that. I know employers like that. They like saving money. So why not? Practice what you preach. You have a right to participate in an OSHA inspection. Be free from retaliation, like I said. Seek safety and health on the job without fear of punishment, right? Employer responsibilities under OSHA: provide a workplace free and recognize hazards. These are your responsibilities as an employer. Comply with OSHA standards, provide training required by OSHA standards, keep records of injuries and illnesses. Those get kept for, I think, 5 or 7 years. I'm gonna have to double check. Provide medical exams when required by OSHA, access to workers' exposures and medical records. Do not discriminate against workers. Post OSHA citations and hazard correction notices. Provide and pay for most of the PPE. That one here, post OSHA citations, that's a law. If you, between February 1st to April 31st, there are record-keeping rules that must be posted at all places, not just cannabis, but if you go to a restaurant during the month of February and April through April, they will have these citations and these corrections posted up. Okay, that's part of OSHA's requirement. Again, continuing on with OSHA responsibilities, report each worker, worker death, hospitalization, allow OSHA records, post annual summaries. Okay. 4 groups of OSHA standards: general industry, which is cannabis, construction, maritime, and agriculture. These are the 4 groups of standards. Okay. Limits workers to exposures, require them to use safe and work practices, and require employers to monitor certain hazards. Okay. Again, you could look this up. This is OSHA provides for free. When you go to the website, you can look up all those citations for a company. Okay. OSHA inspection conducted. You call them, they will come out. An OSHA compliance, safety, and health officer may conduct a workplace inspection at reasonable times, and they come unexpected as well. Okay. Different types of inspections: imminent danger, fatality, or hospitalizations, worker complaints, your targeted inspections, as well as follow-up inspections. And you do have the right to follow these things. Okay. All right, these are your citations. $70,000 for a willful violation, meaning you knew that what you were doing, and you are going to get up to $70,000 for each willful violation. Go down, repeated violation is $70,000. This is OSHA telling you what to do. You didn't do it. They come back and they may cite you again for another repeat violation. There's serious, which is $7,000, and as well as other than serious, which is $7,000. OSHA has a valuable list of resources that you can contact. There's a lot of training institutes. We have one in San Diego. They're headquartered in San Diego. It's a great facility. You can also call NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. They are a great tool, and they are an advocate for safety. When it comes to hierarchy controls, this should be practiced in cannabis space. What happens is you have different elements, and you are trying to increase your effectiveness by either eliminating a product or substituting it, or you could use your engineering controls. You could also use administrative or workplace work practice controls, like have them rotate, take a break. And then you also have the lowest, the catch-all, which is wearing the appropriate personal protective equipment. Okay. This is the hierarchy of controls. Okay. Again, yeah, highest level of protection, elimination. If you're not using it, get rid of it. Engineering controls, change it, open up. Can you have creative violation or a ventilation system? And then your PPE. The head is probably the most important part of the body when it comes to PPE. You have your eyes, you have your brain, nose, mouth, and ears. I was doing a training a few years ago, and one guy was severely allergic to cannabis. It turns out he was allergic to the terpenes. Turns out he was the operations manager for this cannabis grow. This was in LA. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, the company provides him a proper NIOSH approved ventilation system, so he doesn't have those allergic reactions. And I said, that's great. Just bear in mind that one, they have to provide the appropriate PPE for you. And also you have to tell them, and they knew about it, that he is severely allergic to terpenes, but he was very passionate in the cannabis space. And so he wanted to work there. So safety goggles, face shields. Okay. Again, filing a complaint. You can go to OSHA's website. It's right there on the front page, how to file a complaint. Okay. So these are some of the things that we covered today: the importance of OSHA, cannabis safety and health, employer responsibilities, OSHA standards and PPE, OSHA inspections, and safety and health resources, including on how to file a complaint. There are other programs readily available for you: reduction of injury and illnesses, lower workers' compensation costs, improvement on employee motivation, higher quality and productivity, community recognition, statewide industry and government recognition, especially for cannabis, and increased job referrals and bid acceptances. That will be a thing in cannabis in the future. So that is my presentation. Again, I would like to thank the Department of Cannabis Regulation and the BLC for allowing me to present this information to you. Again, my name is Matt Hayashi, and I want to thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. It's great information, super helpful. I think it's very much needed and oftentimes not as discussed as some of the other areas of the cannabis industry. And as a small business owner, those health and safety issues are very important to have a safe work environment and ultimately happy employees that are safe as well. So let's move on, Matt. A lot of good information that's shared. Let's move on to some questions that I think will help continue to provide good resource information to the people that are listening. Let's start off with, do I need an emergency action plan for cannabis?
Short answer is yes. You do need an EAM, an emergency action plan, if they will, they call it. It is required. If you do not have one, then OSHA can and will issue a citation. And we have tons of templates for you to have. If you want it, please let me know and I'll be more than happy to give you a template.
Great. So what, without getting too far in the weeds, what would an action plan include? Emergency action plan.
Well, lately we've been going through, you've experienced it. Let's say fires, for example. You must have a fireproof plan, an exit strategy. So it's not just writing it out, but you must have a map so that every single employee knows where are the exits. How do you properly get out? Is there a leader to lead people out of the building if there is a fire or an earthquake? And where do you meet? Most companies, people meet at a tree or at a parking lot. It doesn't really matter as long as everyone is communicated to meet at the distinct area so that they can do their head count after everyone exits the building.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Definitely. All right. Next question. And again, it's all about safety. And let's be specific here. Regarding chemical safety, how should a company receive chemicals?
Training. One of the things here, and I've seen it a lot in my pharmaceutical medical device days, people were not trained to receive certain chemicals, your acids and your bases and whatnot. In the cannabis space, is the same thing. In manufacturing, if they are volatile processing, they're going to use certain chemicals that are very toxic to the human body. First is training. Train the person. Everyone has shipping and receiving, so you want to train the person who is shipping and receiving. That person should be the only person that is allowed to accept and verify the chemical that is coming in. They have to do a visual inspection first. That's number one, because if they see an acid and it looks like it's clear as water and it's the container's broken and there's liquid in the bag that seals the container, and if it's clear, your automatic intuition is going to be you think it's water, but it could be a very acidic solution. So you have to be trained on these procedures on how to receive chemicals. Time and time again, I've seen chemical burns, and I know that's going to become a thing in the cannabis space in the future. It already is now, but training to shipping and receiving certain chemicals should be very, very important and taken serious.
Very much so. And then let's just drill down a little bit more on that. What about storage? What about how you, after they've been received, what about storage of those chemicals?
So OSHA takes it very serious on chemicals. Your acids, keep with your acids. So for your like for like containers, your base is kept separately in one storage, and then your other chemicals, your acids, should be kept in another storage separately. You don't want those to mix. The other thing is, what is is there a temperature issue? In other words, is there a heating element? Do they explode and in certain degrees? You want to keep those in a fireproof container, some like gasoline, right? Cultivators keep their gasoline in a fireproof container because they're cultivating, right? It's 100 degrees, it's 95 degrees, and they just don't leave their gasoline containers out in the sun. They normally put that in a fireproof container. So these are some of the things that help mitigate some of those issues.
Sure, sure. So, there's probably some questions out there. People have heard about the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, otherwise known as IIPP. And how does it apply in the cannabis space?
They use that is the crux of cannabis safety and health, because those are the guidelines as to what happens if an injury, if there is an injury. So for example, let's say you're processing and you're doing a cold press, right? Cold press, they put a lot of pounds per pressure in squeezing oils out of the flour. They sit there, and what they do is they put the flour in between two pieces of paper or whatnot, and they press the button, and out comes the press. What happens if your fingers get caught in the press, right? They squishes their fingers, then they have to go see a doctor. That alone, they should have instructions on how to properly work a press or a trimmer or something that uses electricity. Okay. If they are not using it properly, then OSHA does have the right to issue out these citations, because the injured person is going to go to the doctor, and they're going to file, the doctor's going to code them in a way where it is kind of like a workplace injury, and they have to record it. So your IIPP is the heart of safety. 100% OSHA is going to ask for your IIPP. We have templates all the time, and I'll be more than happy to give anyone a template for the IIPP. But what I'm saying is you have to practice these IIPPs. You just cannot have an IIPP binder and let it sit collecting dust. You have to maintain it every day. So you have a safety committee, you issue out some of these responsibilities to every single one in the committee, and then bring it back once a month on a quarterly basis, and you talk about some of these issues. That is a maintenance. That's how you maintain an IIPP.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I mean, to your point, safety is an everyday thing. It's not a once in a while thing, right?
No, 100%. It's every day. It is every day, because in the cannabis space, they understand time is money, especially in the cannabis space, time is money. And the cultivators alone, they're just going like gangbusters, especially during the harvest time. What happens, what I've seen is when they're going too fast, injuries happen because they are going too fast. And so the safety manager has to review these things and take their time and methodically practice what they preach. Yes, time is money. We all understand that, but have like a donut Monday morning before you start your day and go over some of these precautions.
No, that's super helpful. That's super helpful. Um, let's talk about heat. Summer's coming, right? Let's talk about heat. When is shade a requirement?
80 degrees. And we're talking, 80 degrees in California is like, it's like nothing, right? It's easy. It's 80 degrees everywhere, somewhere. Even in December 24th or 25th, it's always hot somewhere. So the rule is employees have the right to request shade if it's 80 degrees or hotter, and the employer must provide shade. And that is the key word, must provide shade. This isn't like, here is a branch or a piece of paper and stick it over your head. No, the employer is responsible to provide adequate shade for enough people so that when they get their rest. In addition to that, water breaks. Water breaks are a key thing to make a business successful, especially during the hot times. You do not want your employees to faint or have some kind of dehydration sickness. So what do? You implement a water system. The person's in control of replacing the water every 5 or 6 hours, cold water, not just hot water, but cold water. Make sure the water's clean, and make sure you have enough glasses or containers to drink the water out of, right? In addition to that, you want to make sure that it's stored properly, keep the water clean, and keep the water cold.
Yeah, super helpful. Yep, like I said, summer's on its way. But
Yep.
yeah, you're right. 80 degrees is a Tuesday here in LA. So, um, going back to the illness prevention program, the IIPP, if you don't have a written one, is there a fine? And if so, how much is that fine?
You must have a written one, and there is a certain rule to the exception under less than 10 employees, but I don't really agree to that because someone's going to get hurt anyways. But to answer your question, depending on the situation that the person got hurt, will ultimately determine the citation, the amount. They don't have like a table like, oh, you cut your finger, that's $3,000. Oh, you broke a leg, that's 5,000. That doesn't exist. And essentially what happens is the insurance gets involved and they go down that workers' comp hole, and they determine the citation. OSHA has their citations, but more importantly, the you know you have to remember, OSHA is a steward for the employees. They don't want to issue out citations. It's all about creating safety. And so that's their biggest concern. They do have citations. I've seen it all the time. You see it on the website,
Sure.
and they do have a monetary fine. But again, it's on a case by case thing to determine the
Awesome.
citation.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So as we're starting to wrap up, I'm gonna ask one question. Hey, give me an example. I'm getting ready to start a cannabis business and, thinking about the safety and the health and all the great things that you just shared. What's the one thing as I'm starting, the one thing, Matt, that you would advise me to do or to think about?
Train your employees. I cannot stress that enough. Train your employees. It's the biggest CYA in the entire cannabis industry, 100%. If you're going to hire your employees, you must train them to every single thing that you want them to do. And you just can't train them. You also want to document your training to show that you are doing your part. The reason I stress that so much is twofold. The employee is clocking in, they're going to do their job, but you also want the employee to feel free from retaliation and be happy at their job. Well, what better way than provide all the safety and provide all of that information to them so that they are, he or she is comfortable enough to doing the job at hand. At the end of the day, your employee clocks out. They go home. They're safe. They didn't cut their finger. They didn't break their leg, and they will go home to see their loved ones. And what better way than to do that than to implement these safety training? On the flip side, from the employer's perspective, they make more money. They make more money because they save money on the training and lower the workers' comp. And at the same time, the workers will have a bigger, greater output, knowing that they're entering into a safe environment. So training, training, training.
Awesome. Okay. With that, Matt, thank you so much. And I'll share with everyone. Thank you again to our presenter, Matt Hayashi. And thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's Learning Management System. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Thank you again for joining us and have a fantastic day.